Welcome back to Storytime with Dan Booker. I appreciate you coming back and listening in on a new adventure with the Time Is crew. Now, we stopped at Time Is, Time Was, Time Will Be, and then we read Patches. That was a request from one of the listeners, and I appreciate that very much. Always happy to read anything you wish me to. But we're going to go to Book 4 finally, Time Is Once More. And we may be able to do more than one chapter at a time on this one. Chapters aren't small, but I kind of owe you, don't I? So hold on one second. We get a sip of tea to make sure I'm ready. Today's tea of choice is oolong. So, normally I go through Tetley's or Yorkshire Gold. I'll get lost without my tea. Okay, trip to France. The opening is, the quote is, "For no matter the shadows of an age, the picture of a young couple in love, we are told, speaks most luminously of the future. A span of that passion makes us believe that we can overleap any walls, obliterate whatever obstacles." That's from Chang Ray Lee on Such a Full Sea. So we're going to have to pause for a minute because I just realized my eyesight sucks today and I'm going to need to wear glasses. So give me a moment. Oh, I keep trying to do without them, but much better. I can see clearly now. My glasses are on. Okay. Wow, words. Wow, awesome. Okay, Don and Honey Skelton were consummate tide travelers and leading members of the Guild of Travelers. They were seated in the lab poring over several books on French history. Their 20th wedding anniversary was soon to arrive. They were planning a trip and working out who or what they wanted to see. Honey was anxious to see an early French fete, and Don wanted to participate in at least one joust, so at least that part was settled. They were looking over various periods and events to find one that would meet their needs. As they were flipping through the numerous tomes, their son sauntered in and helped himself to a cup of coffee. He wandered around the lab looking at the shelves of artifacts collected from years of time trips. The lab housed the temporal correlation vector transport device, commonly known as Fred the Time Machine. It also had a mini kitchen, library, workshop, metal shop, coffee and tea bar, and a computer diagnostic and repair section. Packed at the back of it was a home to their museum. This held items collected from trips over the years. Some items were rather mundane, such as the poster, package of gum, and Cracker Jacks that came from the 5-minute test trip to the Chicago World's Fair. Others were of cultural and historical significance, such as the original print of the Declaration of Independence and one of Lincoln's hats given to Scott. I think I've read of Don and Lincoln's trip to see Lincoln and hang out with him when he was a young man in Springfield. So there was one item which fascinated him. It was a set of pottery cups and pitcher blazoned with a crest. His mother and father had this painted by a friend they had made while visiting the Middle Ages in England. The crest was supposed to be from his mother's side. She never said much about it. In fact, it seemed there was something about its history that almost embarrassed her. Still, she had enough pride in it to put it on show in the lab. The thought that he had a regal blood was an exciting idea for him. He loved to imagine himself as a handsome knight riding on a fiery steed. His parents had only recently informed him regarding the lab, Fred, and how they and their friends formed the Guild of Travelers and traveled through time. They then wrote papers to correct misconceptions and errors in history books. He was now 16 and finally had access to the lab. He picked up the instruction book for the time machine and continued reading where he had left off. Scott and his dad had written detailed instructions from the beginning of Fred's construction. Then, with every addition or change, they added more details. Maybe he's 14. Uh, bum, 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 bum. He was nearing the end of the first book of instruction, and there were still 2 more to go. Don had insisted that if Donald were going to join them in time traveling, he would have to learn as much about the workings of Fred as he could. He lay back and put his feet up as best he could on the edge of a nearby table. The reading was slow and not particularly interesting. He had to admit it would be difficult to liven up a set of detailed instructions in computer programs. Every now and then his dad had added a side note about part of the program or a trip that was usually funny, or at least he tried to make it funny. As he read, he listened to his parents debating the merits of one time or a location over another for their trip. He was studying on Fred's workings because he was going to have the honor of being their guardian angel. That's what they called the person who kept an eye on the travelers. It meant he would have to be able to pull them out of danger in case anything went south. Honey and Don eventually closed the books with an air of finality. Well, I think that settles everything, Honey murmured with satisfaction. They replaced the stack of books in the library shelf and gathered their notes together. Don nudged his sleeping son with his knee and grinned as Donald slowly pried his eyes open. Had a nice nap. Donald blinked and stretched, gathered his wits about together. Yeah, this instruction book is great for insomnia. Donald put it back with the others and tossed his cup in the trash. Yeah, I'm going over to the village for a while and see if there's anything I can do. Seems like Will, Francis, and Zeke have too much on their hands when there isn't any customers to help out, even with the extra staff they take on periodically. He kissed his mother and left humming to himself as he strode casually off to the village. Honey smiled as she leaned on the door frame, watching him walk down the path. How's your swagger, Don? I bet he's headed primarily to see Zeke. Dan peered over Honey's shoulder. Yep, he's definitely got that going to see my love walk. I still get a kick that Frances insisted they named her girl Zeke, and an even bigger kick that Zeke takes pride in her name now once she found out who he was. Then he turned and put her arms around Don, holding him close. I have a feeling Zeke and our boy have a kind of forever lover look about them. And smiled at Honey and kissed her tenderly. She saw lovers everywhere and was known to try and get people together at the dances they occasionally had. Her latest pairing was with Frank and Sandy's daughter Lorna from 94 AD Rome and Mac's son Dale from the diner. The two had hit it off immediately, and every time Lorna came up with Linus, Honey made sure Dale knew she was around. I don't know why it's so dry in here. As Donald approached the far end of the property, he reached the entrance of the village. He marveled not for the first time as how true to the rendition of a late 1700s village it was. His parents had found an old cabin and lots of foundations here. They hired a specialist to recreate the village as it had been before it had been destroyed in an explosion. It is now being used as a recreational village where people could stay and live as people had lived in the 1700s for 2 weeks at a time. They'd work in various areas or assist with the farm. Wolf had hired a few specialists who guided primary areas that were not self-explanatory. His dad, Don, demonstrated blacksmithing and did outdoor shadow puppet shows in the evening. Sometimes he even came out and just made things for the fun of it. His latest interest was medieval weapons. His mom specialized in weaving and jewelry making. He was becoming a specialist with the animals. They'd become highly successful with many return customers. Will, Francis, and Zeke managed the village, so they retained half the profits. 2/3 of the rest went to Don and Honey and Donald. The last third was set aside for maintenance and expansion of the village. In between customers, they worked on keeping the place as near perfect as possible. Donald helped as often as he could. He was fast becoming an expert on the animals and worked to keep the horses in training and the cattle fit. Over the years he had been associated with the village, he had formed a close bond with Wilf and Francis's daughter, Zeke. Side note here, Francis was born in the 1700s and lived in this village. She was brought forward by Wilf when he went back in time to see how the village was run. Zeke had been the town leader and like a father to Francis. When Wilf and Francis's daughter was born, Francis insisted that they name her Zeke in his honor. Okay, enough exposition. At the village, Donald made a quick survey of the area, looking around for anyone. Not finding anybody, he then headed to the animal enclosures at the far end. This area was almost continuously being repaired or improved. Found everyone there. Zeke was working on cleaning out the cow shed, and her parents were doing some wall repairs. Found Zeke hard at work with pitchfork and shovel, cleaning out the manure and placing it into a cart. When full, she was dumping it onto a manure pile. Once this pile broke down, it was used in the field and kitchen garden. He grabbed a shovel and started helping. As they worked, Zeke and Donald sang and bumped hips in rhythm. Wilf and Francis paused in their work to watch them. Kind of looks like us, doesn't it? Francis remarked affectionately. She and Wilf went back to patching the wall, Wilf laying bricks and Francis plastering. As they worked, they also sang and bumped hips. Francis paused and adjusted her cap. Have your parents decided on the anniversary trip yet? She inquired. Donald straightened a kink out of his back. Yeah, Middle Ages France seems to be the current choice. Mom wants to do some shopping and see the sights, but I think Dad just wants to try out his new armor in a joust. She shook her head. He's determined to get himself killed then. Donald reproved her. He's been practicing in the ring against dummies and against me. I think he'll do really well. Besides, if he gets into trouble, I'll be there to pull him out. Zeke shrugged and went on with her work. Oh, I do apologize. She had been told about the time trips, but hadn't given it much thought. Donald was a little closer to things and had a lot more enthusiasm. Tonight he planned on bringing Zeke into the time-traveling mentality. He'd gotten his parents' permission to take a trip and bring Zeke with him. He planned on going to 1893 France to see Joseph Pujol. Joseph Pujol, also known as the Petomane, a flatulent artist. They made short work of the cowshed and went into the cabin for a cup of coffee and a carrot cake. Donald ate enthusiastically. Francis was as good a cook as Honey and always ensured he didn't go away hungry. Donald finished his cake and kissed Zeke goodbye, listening upon the promise from her that she'd be ready to go to the lab at 1400. Oh, God. Good thing I made a pot. I'm going to need a lot of it. At 1400, Zeke met Donald at the entrance of the village and they wandered back to the lab. They found Don and Honey already stationed to act as their angels. In the light of the lab, Zeke noticed Donald was dressed in clothing from France, circa 1893. Honey escorted Zeke to outfit her in the same period. Donald was wearing the suit that Don had worn when he saw Pujol with Scott and then with Honey. Zeke came out of the clothing storage unit with a flushed face. She was wearing high-heeled boots, long skirt of fine wool, a silk shirt with puffed sleeves, a cravat, and a small waist-length jacket. Her hair was curled and she was wearing a cap with a long feather. Donald's eyes widened at her beauty and at the narrowness of her waist. Mom, she doesn't need a corset. Besides, she may want to breathe. Honey opened Zeke's coat. She isn't wearing her. That's just her. Donald blushed and Zeke readjusted herself, smiling with pride. Working at the village keeps me fit. Kind of get where we're going and sort of when. But what are we going to see? Donald stifled a giggle and tried to look serious. It's a family tradition, he said. We're going to see a special act. Come on, we'll eat on the way. Don handed him a wallet filled with period money and a purse of coins. The returns were converted into wrist units worn under the clothes. Don had them do a function check, and once cleared, he determined they were ready. Honey, with great ceremony, opened the portal. Donald and Zeke stepped through, emerging at the Arc de Triomphe, and walked arm in arm to the little restaurant that Don and Scott had visited on one of their first trips. Don kept the viewer high as unobtrusively as possible, while still being able to keep a ready eye on his charges. Even though he had the viewer masked, the slight hum it produced would have distracted Donald and Zeke. You could see him sitting at the restaurant by the window overlooking the park. At least Donald knows French. He'll do better than I did on our date, Don said as he watched Donald ordering easily. Don and Honey had an amusing time watching the two. Donald was doing his best to make Zeke laugh, and Zeke was doing her best to be serious. Only once did Donald make her break down and laugh. He caught her off guard, and she spewed her onion soup. When the second course came, their eyes were locked together, and Donald was holding her hand. Honey came up behind Don and gave him a hug. "I better start making wedding plans," she whispered in his ear. She helped herself to a cup of tea and brought the coffee over to Don. Don and Zeke casually finished their meal. After eating, they spent some time walking through the park across the street. Seated on a bench near the center, they had a sketch done by Charles Edward Petomane, which he colored quickly in chalk. He did a couple of charcoal sketches of them in various poses and then gave them the chalk sketch, refusing any money from Donald. Surreptitiously, Donald passed it through a small portal Don opened up on his right. It landed with a plop inside the lab. Honey grabbed it and made a frame for it so they could hang it up at Wilf and Francis's cabin. Zeke was fascinated by the sculptures scattered throughout the park, so they walked around to admire them. Zeke's boots began to hurt her feet, so they sat on the edge of the fountain to rest a while. About an hour later, Donald checked his pocket watch and determined it was time to see Pujol. Yeah, I wasn't kidding. I need a refill. See, got this on a cast iron heater with a candle in it. Keeps the tea nice and hot. I don't like iced tea because I spent so many years doing theater and everything you drank, no matter what you were supposed to be drinking, was cold tea. And after that, I never wanted another one. Okay. Don followed them as they walked to the Moulin Rouge. Just as Funny finished framing the portrait. Unbelievable. Apologize. I swear to God, that's just tea. It's nothing stronger. Honey finished framing the portrait and leaned it against one of the lab desks. She headed towards the door. "Well, we may have a long wait. I think I'll slip back to the house and bring back some eclairs." Don blushed a fiery red. "There may not be any left." Honey screeched to a halt, turning swiftly back from the door. "You didn't eat all 15 at once, did you?" Don avoided her accusing stare. "Well, I took a short breather between number 9 and, yeah, I ate the rest. Don't worry, I've made some more paste and it's in the fridge ready to make some new ones." He pleaded in hopes to make amends. Then he curled up in her comfy chair with a cup of tea and no eclair and watched the screen, muttering to herself. Don quietly got up and went back to the house and brought back 3 eclairs for each of them. And he looked up with a wry smile. She had fervently hoped Don was just kidding and was relieved that he had been, but she swore she'd make him pay for his little joke. On the viewer, they watched as day turned to evening. They still had not seen Donald and Zeke emerge from inside. Plenty of others had left the place, and the place seemed to be closing. Don brought the viewer inside the building and did a search for them. To his surprise, he found them seated at a table close to the stage, drinking a beer with Monsieur Pujol. The place was closed, and they were the only ones still there. Don turned up the volume just as Monsieur Pujol rose and bid Donald and Zeke good night, hugging them both fondly. Don and Honey sat open-mouthed as they watched Zeke and Donald stroll nonchalantly outside and finding a quiet spot actually had their returns to come home. Arriving inside the lab, Zeke hastily changed back into her normal clothes, but Donald remained as he was, seating himself at one of the desks and laughing at the surprised looks on his parents' faces. Zeke pulled up a chair next to Donald and, holding his hand, silently laughed with a reminiscent smile. Don and Honey waited for an explanation. It was clear to them Donald wanted them to ask for it. "Okay, Donald," Don explained at last. "Out of all of us, you two are the only ones to have a drink with Pujol. You want to tell us how you managed to pull that off?" Don placed an arm around Zeke and stretched his legs on a chair. "Mom, do you remember teaching me that you should always choose your words with care?" Honey nodded. "Well, after Pujol's show, he went around shaking hands and giving a fart to each, just like you both told me you would. I heard people commenting on his act, and at that word, his face tightened a little. He was still courteous, but I saw the word offended him. When it was our turn, I congratulated him on his performance and artistry. He let out a fart that went up the scale like an exclamation point. He asked us to hang around, and he'd be right out. I ordered him a beer, and he sat with us, saying we were the first, or one of the few, who appreciate the artistic merits of his performance. We talked a while about the diverse nature of his show and the muscular control necessary for the performance of it. He's actually quite a proud man and takes his craft seriously. The longer we talked, the more friendly he became. It was amazing how affable he became just because we talked of his performance instead of saying an act." Don congratulated them both and patted Donald on the shoulder. Honey kissed them both, wishing them good night. Zeke asked Donald for a short moonlight ride before they separated. Don and Honey watched them go to the barn, and they then stole into the house, headed for bed. Tomorrow they would go to the France themselves, but a different France with a different mission, since tomorrow was their anniversary. Okay, I'm going to spin this out. I'm going to stop there. So that's chapter 1 of Time Is Once More, book 4 of the Time Is series. And I will, let's see, tomorrow's Monday is my light day, so I'll try to do this by Tuesday, and we'll do Honey and Don's anniversary trip to France. I'm going to keep saying this until I get some more comments, but if you do like these, let me know. Comments are welcome, and I really, really mean that. If you don't like these, let me know that too, and let me know what you don't like. So I look forward to seeing you again on Tuesday. I hope you'll tune in. I'll get this out in about an hour, which, I don't know why I'm telling you, because when it's out, it's out. If you are an author and you have something that you have written, or a poet, or you do flash fiction, you'd like to have it read on this site, let me know. I am always looking for something else to read besides my own work. So I look forward to seeing you again on Tuesday, and thank you again for visiting, and have a good day. Be good to yourself. Bye.